Good afternoon and most welcome to the farmhouse in the smack center of Gothenburg. We are sitting in a tropical heat here. The sun is gazing from a cloudless sky today actually. There's not a single cloud to be seen anywhere. And we've been talking about thinking and what is thinking. And I mentioned lastly there are many connections here to both Merleau-Ponty and the Klein bottle, that there are different interpenetrating levels and that they are distinct as well as interpenetrating. And here we're talking about thinking and the explanation of thinking. What did I think? Or if you ask me what I thought. And we assume that anyone can speak about these things with ease, not being able to say what one thinks is odd. This is important because even though we have ability to reflect on our thinking, speak about it, communicate it, it doesn't mean they are the same or that there is an originary process that gives our knowledge of what we were thinking. Just as in the Klein bottle, they are distinct, as subject is distinct from object. And that's an important part of the process. A causal connection between toucher and touched would ruin it, or more correctly, it doesn't really make sense. And it ends with an example. You said exactly what I expected you to say. You say exactly what I expected you to say. We won't know how to put the utterance and the reaction together. On some occasions, we might decide to believe her despite the conflicting evidence. On others, we might make the opposite decision. The key point, however, is that what matters is not some mysterious experience inner, which somehow contains the explanation the individual later gives, but the individual's special role as elucidator of her own words and deeds. Although her statements use the past tense, it is the past tense of the inner, and so it has a different grammar from the past tense used to describe events and occurrences. So they are different. There are different shells of the climb bottle, so to speak. Here it might be objected that this seems a rather odd sort of past tense. For if the account of the past simply rests on what the individual is inclined to say, how can it be of interest? Why isn't this supposed disclosure empty talk or mere fantasy? And what Wittgenstein is referring to here, how we talk about experiences are different to how we talk about thoughts. There are certain family resemblance, but they are completely different. And the question posed is, we don't talk about inner experiences. What on earth are we talking about? Asking this question involves misunderstanding the nature of our interest in the inner. For exactly the same question could be asked in relation to the individual's utterances in the present tense. For example, if we are to treat the sounds she utters as speech, we must see some intention as lying behind them, and this involves assuming that she can explain her words. That is, say what she means and what she meant. Similarly, if we are to treat the individual's behavior as voluntary, we must assume that in general she can explain it. That is, say what the intention behind it was. In the case of meaning, the speaker's privileged position in the language game reflects the assumption that she is saying something. And this assumption is justified not by the occurrence of some special process, but by the fact that at any time the speaker can be stopped and asked to explain what she means. Do note here, all these different games are entirely different. They don't even touch each other. The distinctive status of the speaker's claims is underlined by the fact that the possibility of error is irrelevant. It's a good clue here. There is no possibility of an error in the speaker's situation. She cannot misjudge her intentions or what she was thinking. It would not matter if the individual said, "It seemed to me that I meant," because the subjective element would make no difference. What interests us is the explanation the speaker is inclined to give, so the possibility of mistake is excluded. It is a sort of language game that doesn't have the possibility of being false or wrong or mistaken. This may seem to leave unanswered the question as to whether use of the past tense is justified. But the question itself is misleading, for this is simply how we use the past tense in this context. So if I say, I yesterday thought the following, that's a special use of the language game of referring to one's thinking. I think it could be helpful to see that we normally, from an analytical philosophical viewpoint or classical philosophy, we feel that there is an empty space, needs to be filled with causal explanations, maybe. Kalle felt something inwardly, therefore he said the following. I make him into a machine almost. The fact is, he can never be mistaken. This may seem to leave unanswered the question as to whether use of the past tense is justified, but the question itself is misleading. For this is simply how we use the past tense in this context. Very telling. The impossibility of checking the individual's account of the past and of the present is not a weakness, but a reflection of what makes these concepts important to us. A real past tense which did not rely on the privileged position of the speaker/agent would have a completely different interest. I would say the computer maybe, or a robot. Instead of giving the individual's account of her experience, it would simply give us more information about the outcome. That is, tell us that such and such a change took place in her brain. I would say also that it could help us in making predictions on her behavior without inferring she has an inner experience. There would be very good reasons for that sort of language game to do. Furthermore, it is important to note that within the grammar of our current psychological concepts, we do make a distinction between the past and the present. For example, if someone says something and clarifies a statement by saying, "What I mean is," rather than "what I meant was," the implication is that she is amending her statement rather than simply elucidating it. Although her statement does not refer to something that happened at the time of speaking, it makes a significant difference whether she presents the explanation as one she would have offered at the time, or as something that has occurred to her since. Here's a quote from Wittgenstein. He asks, "What did you mean when you said?" question mark. I answer the question and then I add, "If you had asked me before, I would have answered the same. My answer was not an interpretation which had just occurred to me." So had it occurred to me earlier? No. And how then was I able to say, if you had asked me earlier, I'd have? What did I infer it from? From nothing at all. What do I tell when I utter the conditional? Something that may sometimes be of importance. And I would say my commentary would be that we are too hastily trying to connect everything to make it a continuum of happenings and see an original cause somewhere. See it instead at different things being in relation to each other, not of relations we don't know. Although the individual gives the account now, she distinguishes within that account between what she thought, meant and intended at the time, and what she now thinks, means and intends. And this distinction has an obvious importance. They are widely different, and failing to understand that will lead to misunderstanding and not getting the intention. There are good reasons for the complexity of language. They are not hiding something, they are revealing something about the nature of reality. It is not like Chomsky would indicate that language is hiding an ulterior essence of reality, which we are unaware of and never will be aware of. No language is in itself perfect as it is. When the individual says she would have offered the same explanation had she been asked earlier, the other person, and here comes the quote, knows, for example, that I haven't changed my mind. It also makes a difference whether I reply that I was only saying these words to myself. without meaning anything by them, or that I meant this or that by them. Much depends on this. Thus, the use of the past tense is both appropriate and necessary. This is a good point. Indeed, if we treat the explanation as coming after the words, we would undermine the notion of a speaker altogether. And of course of consciousness, intention, and all those things.
Jag har varit inne och spett, men jag har inte kollat på dina än. Jag har inte orkat kolla på TikTok.
The individual would be transformed into a speaking machine from which words spontaneously issued, and later with explanations for why those words were issued. Computer once more. Ex hypothesi, her words would be as much of a surprise to her as to anyone. If that were so, why should we treat her as better placed to interpret them than anyone else? Make me think there are some people that try to explain what anyone else, what someone else could mean, and it never made any sense to me. Also see here how Daniel Dennett and Richard Dawkins all makes this mistake and see us as talking machines. Why would language evolve if we were all talking machines then? Doesn't really make any sense. One feature of this account is that it rejects the idea that our talk of meaning is based on occurrences of special inner processes. This may seem implausible, but consider the parallel case of understanding. Suppose someone is told that it is 7 o'clock, doesn't react, and then suddenly exclaims, 7 o'clock. Then I am already late. Here the inclination is to say that a specific process must have occurred when the individual suddenly realized what the words meant. What does this process involve? What happens when the individual repeats the words 7 o'clock? Significantly, all we can do in response to this question is paraphrase the idea that the individual suddenly grasped what had been said. This encourages us to argue that the process of understanding is indescribable, whereas in fact there is nothing further to describe. There is no mystery here. There's no hidden box of a private language of meanings that we can never see. It's all in the open. It's the process of space itself. It's working property. The actions of the individual provide the criteria for claims about how she understood something, and it is only on the basis and in relation to these criteria that we talk of something going on inside her. Here's a good example. Suppose, for example, that we tell two people to turn left and one of them turns left and the other turns right. How should we describe the difference between them? We may certainly say that something different went on inside each of them. But the key point is that the basis for saying this is the way each acted, not what they were thinking. Listen now. The inner process is not independent of the individual's behavior, but something we impute to her as a way of characterizing her action. So first there is action, verbal happenings, and then we make it, if we want, for some other reasons, into a property of a noun. The difference between the two individuals is not some further thing, but is the occurrence of a specific unknown inner process, but the fact that, as their action showed, one understood correctly, while the other did not. And if you think about that carefully, you see it doesn't imply a difference in thinking process. It doesn't even involve thinking processes. Once more, we have the vortex between the inner and outer. And here you can see in the text, this misunderstanding makes the flow between inner and outer hard to happen. In a person, his inner will be completely separated from the outwardness of real life. So what they were feeling inside when they turned left or right would be disjunct completely from reality. Just as in René Descartes, where there is no connection whatsoever. Taking these points into account, Wittgenstein summarizes his conclusions, and in doing so uncovers the real source of his difficulties. He begins by noting that the experience of meaning is irrelevant to linguistic communication, and on this basis argues that if one compares the coming of meaning into one's mind to a dream, then our talk is ordinarily dreamless. According to this approach, the meaning-blind man would be someone who always talked dreamlessly, and by implication, he would be missing out on little or nothing. However, this conclusion is not quite right. In fact, the use of the word dream here is useful, but only if one sees that it still contains an error itself. The error lies in failure to distinguish between meaning and the experience of meaning. For while the second need not accompany speech, the first must. Take the parallel example of understanding. I thought the whole time that you were talking about. Only how was it, surely not otherwise, than if he really had been speaking of that man. We're talking about a misunderstanding now. My later realization that I understood him wrong does not alter anything about what happened as I was understanding the words. If then the sentence, "At that point I believe that you meant," is the report of a dream, that means that I always dream when I understand a sentence. I'm going to make a midterm summary here.
Page 84.
Yes, page 84, the last quote from Wittgenstein. Let me also get
Which chapter is it? It should be
Remarks of the Philosophy of Psychology. And he has written two, and these are, I am pretty certain, posthumously printed from Wittgenstein. The mistake is searching for a true origin, an essence in the person. And it is in some ways vaguely similar of the Gödelian mistake of thinking all the axioms must lead to the theorems, and vice versa. The mistaken belief here will develop into a search for an arche or an essence. And it could go two ways, speaking about taking left and right. Taking left would lead you into what was the dominant philosophy of consciousness until recently, that we are machines. That we speak like we are dreamless. That there is a chattering going on in our heads, almost like a computer. But for that to work, language must have evolved in a way that is quite impossible without taking in the outer. It has to be completely private in that case. Very similar to the earlier Wittgenstein Tractatus, where the words are just there without any reason. I could have needed a whiteboard here, but I will help you with a whiteboard to the next lecture. I got some ideas of what to draw to help here. But think about the Necker cube. Think about the inner being one take of the Necker cube, because you can see it in two ways. One you can call inner, and the second you can call outer. they are completely disjunct. They are actually two different chemical substances, or crystals rather. But they are the same as well. As we mentioned in the previous lecture from Hans Ruin, he looks at inner and outer in all his texts, as well as he is also looking into law and language. And there is a most pertinent parallel here. The misunderstanding that most non-scholar people has about these things are similar in some ways, that they are absolutely disjunct. We also mentioned tradition and modernity. Could be suggested that you see talk about your inner experience and the language game of your experience are two vertices going in different directions, absolutely similar, but participating in a similar dance, necessary for language to work. It will lead to irresolvable problems within philosophy, linguistics and science if these thoughts are not taken for what they are. It would lead to an establishment of a private language or a hidden inner, which also constructs a transcendental world of Platonic images or Tegmarkian other worlds somewhere. So the cost of not understanding is immensely, especially in these days when we fall into these things even more. Maybe Kalle, you have something to say?
Okay.
You want to sit here?
You decide. I can stay here.
Wherever you want. Let's see. Let me first check that you're in.
Let me be in front of you and the camera. I think it's the best solution. So let me put it in a, let's transfer this to my world, that is the New Testament. So let's imagine that Hans is Paul, Apostle Paul, and I am his secretary. And I write down something, and I supposedly make a mistake. So scholars, modern scholars, they say that they claim me, that is his Paul's secretary, that I misunderstood you, Hans, that is Paul. So I'm the secretary. I'm the what do you call it? Syndabock, the scapegoat. I'm the scapegoat. The pharmakos. But the question is, who is to blame, so to say? Should we blame anybody? Derrida wrote a book about the postcard. That is, let's say that you, Paul, would send me a postcard instead. I would be, instead of being secretary, I would be a congregation in somewhere else. Perhaps your postcard or letter with your message would never reach me. So then it's a lost message. Then it doesn't matter what you thought, because it didn't reach me. So who is to blame in this case? Okay, perhaps the postal services, the Roman postal services. Anyhow, you can blame me, the congregation who never received the letter. So in the end, the original intention doesn't matter really, because we cannot never know it. So I'm the interpreter, Paul's interpreter. So my meaning is what I'm doing the signature. I'm the one doing the signature. That is, I'm metaphorically speaking, signing the meaning, giving it the meaning, and then later, the modern readers of today of Paul's letters, they become the secretaries or the interpreters of Paul. So what Paul meant, we can never know. It's impossible for us to know then, because it is filtered through generations. But here I would like to return to Wittgenstein, from the Redau Paul to Wittgenstein. So here was, I think, a very good example with, let's say that Paul here says, right. I, his secretary, I also thinking right, but for some reason I turn to left. It could be a mistake. So where is should we blame me, that I turn to left instead of turning to right? That is a tricky question. Is the intention that counts? It's perhaps the complementary. Okay, so the right of Paul is right in one sense, like in drawing hands of Escher. What you say to me is right, but also my turn to the left is right in one sense. So even my error is right in one sense, because it's my interpretation. You said go to right, but for some reason I turn to left. So both are right, or rather, we cannot know afterwards what you said. But let me, this is, I think the illustration to turn to left light is good one, but then later on I would ask that you comment on how I understood. I'm not sure that I understood the comparison correctly. And then let's go to the page 84. So it's Wittgenstein writing here. At that point, I believe that you meant that was, I, secretary said, I thought that you, Paul, believe that you meant like this. It's the report of a dream. That means that I always dream when I understand a sentence. So that let's say, you dictate to me, and I am dreaming, so to say. But I don't completely agree here with Wittgenstein, because it's that you, Paul, is dreaming, because you're dreaming that you can actually reach me. It's true, like your secretary, I could be daydreaming myself too. But in this comparison, I would say it's more you, Paul, who is dreaming, because you imagine that your message can reach me. But as Derrida's only his postcard, we never know if the message reaches. So it's you, the sender, who is daydreaming, and I'm the interpreter. So here I don't agree with this. So Paul, Paul Hans, I would like to ask you a question about, let's say, of my two objections. So let's say that you say right, and I turn to left. You comment then about who is dreaming, who is really doing the dreaming. I'm not sure about that, so I would like to hear your feedback.
I will give a feedback on the first one, which was very good. Yeah, the letter is exactly what this is about. It is not taken until it's seen. You need to receive the postcard. And the mistake we are in, because we don't understand the true nature of language, which is not that complicated, in a way, of course, it's hard to get. We tend to do the mistake of thinking of essences or originals, either in the original of a Bible text, which is a very good example, which you can fight over and say, is the rewrite the original when he changed his mind, whatever that is? Or is it the original? Or is it the secretary who mishears and writes an F when it should be a T, for instance? And completely another way of explaining turning to the left and to the right. I would do as Hans Rehn. I use several different strange attractors. Is good to Robert Pfeiffer, the android constructor from Switzerland. And when you think of this is not Wittgensteinian take, but think about telling someone go to the right and to the left, which I experienced in the military. Often we didn't hear what they were shouting to us, because it's too strangled when you have a high-pitched voice. It's so much more. It is the context, it's the body movement, it is in the air. So if the person were to say go to the left but pronounced it bodily wise, fractally, as going to the right, we would have done that, no doubt. These underlying features we are blind to, and they can cause us to invent an inner life that is impenetrable even to the person himself. And thereby we have a double world. But when it comes to the dreams, I get back to that when I get a whiteboard. I'll continue a little bit if we have some time.
A pause or?
Little pause. So let me continue and we make a summary here. Although the experience of meaning is irrelevant, a dream, the idea that we understood a sentence in a particular way at the time it was uttered is not. The explanation may come later, but it is an explanation of what we understood at the time. The mistake we could do here is to try to understand the understanding process itself, making it like a computer dream, or zeros and ones, or as Dennett would have it, metaphysical text within that is automated. If therefore we compare our inclination to offer such explanations with our inclinations to report dreams, then such dreams must be seen as occurring continuously whenever we are engaged in intelligent conversation. In this respect, therefore, the notion of a dream is misleading. What matters is that we are continuously able to offer an explanation. And there is no need for us to be having any particular experience for this to be the case. The key here is to distinguish meaning from the experience of meaning. Those are not the same. So we don't need a continuous flow of meaning in our head to produce our speech. We don't know what's happening, and I would even say it's not even a legit question. the meaning of an individual's words relates to the intention she had when uttering them, and this does not consist in an experience or any other occurrence at the time of speaking. By contrast, the experience of meaning does relate to an experience, and if it has any significance, it must be in a quite different field. And the last one is summarizing everything. It is most definitely in a... could I borrow the pen? The pencil, please? No, it's okay. As I mentioned before, this is trying to avoid the problem of an absolute disjunct inner and a completely disjunct outer. Here you see the outer. When I ask Kalle what did he mean, it doesn't infer that his inner is cut off from the world, or he is a brain in a vat. And as you see, it doesn't really make sense to say that we're continuously dreaming, that we have either words continuously flowing and inner speech, or images flowing in our head. According to Wittgenstein, those questions can be shown to be mistaken in the sense they don't have a sensible answer. And of course, this is the reason why Wittgenstein deeply believed in the soul instead, that was much different from inner speech or images. I'm just hypothesizing. Maybe that's why he was such a deeply religious person. Nobody knows. And compared to Descartes, that reduced thinking to what was perceived, what got into his head from the outside, what he thought was the outside was his thinking, made it a receptacle for outsideness, and not really in his authority or power. Another thing, deeply sick people, as Ian McKilkus has mentioned, schizophrenics, they think actually that there is, almost like you see on a movie, a subtitle going on in their heads that regulates their doings. And they feel themselves, they're not happy with that situation, so to speak. It makes their movements very hard and their thinking heavy and not functioning in the proper mode. Of course, this has parallel to Graham Priest's paraconsistent logic. I won't go into that now. But you can see clearly the confusion that for the inner and outer to be together doesn't mean that they cannot be disjunct. It's just the opposite. The togetherness makes for the disjunction. Maybe a little comment from Kalle here.
Thank you, Hans. Let me return. And I have the audacity of criticizing Wittgenstein / Johnston. So I return to the example with, let's say, Paul, Hans here says to me, turn to right, and I turn to left. So on page 83 we read, the difference between the two individuals is not some further thing, but the fact that as they action so, one understood correctly, but the other did not. So let's say Paul here, Hans says to two persons, turn to right, but I, for some reason, I turn to left. And what I object is the word correctly. So So if I turn to left, should I be blamed for that? Is not also the sender perhaps was not clear enough, didn't articulate clear enough? So I would like to reconstruct in Derrida's sense that is really both fault at me, but also the sender. But finally, is perhaps my interpretation that is relevant because I signed the meaning. So what you said, perhaps we cannot know, except if we have a video recording of your words. But then, fault should perhaps still be with you, Hans, Paul, if you said one thing and I misunderstood you, or you were not stern enough or clear enough. So I think correctly is we should avoid that. And I would, before I finish, make a reference to this book by David Morris. This David Morris is a professor of philosophy at Concordia University, and there I found one interesting sentence on page 211. There is no point of origin, there is rather movement. So here is a reference to Merleau-Ponty's philosophy. Indeed, in this case, the point of origin is Paul or Hans, who said one thing and I misunderstood Hans. So it doesn't, the origin of the words doesn't matter because we cannot know. Rather, it's the movement, this movement. So it's our interaction that there is the secret. Or both ways, perhaps, is the movement in Merleau-Ponty's sense, or in the Derrida's sense is the receiver who signs the meaning. So I give it back to you also, and perhaps finish the words since Palm House closes at 4 p.m.
Yeah, I think actually in this case your criticism of Wittgenstein is correct, and I think what you say is possibly what he meant. That it's not about being right or wrong in this case. It's more of is there an inner intention that is correct, and to make it correct understanding of what is said. So maybe the person that turned to the left was right. Yes, it's a good understanding of Wittgenstein, actually, I would say. We deconstructed Wittgenstein even. You can only do this in the Palm House. Any further questions, Kalle? Say thank you very much and have a very pleasant afternoon from the Palm House. Let's have a little panoramic view of the very nice environment we have here. Leaves up palms and tropical heat today.
Thank you.
Bye for now.